The wind never really stopped on the Wyoming plains. It whispered through dry grass, rattled loose shingles on an old barn, and sang lonely songs that no one but Calder Briggs could hear. Nestled in a remote valley far from town, his cabin sat like a forgotten relic, rugged, weather-worn, and standing only because of the man who kept it alive. Calder had lived alone for 12 years. He wasn't old, mid-40s, lean from labor, his face etched with wind lines and sorrow, but life had worn him down in ways time couldn't measure. People in town remembered him as the rancher who once had a wife and a future. Before it all vanished like a spring thaw. No one asked questions anymore, and he offered no answers. Each morning began before sunrise. Calder would stoke the fire, heat black coffee in a tin pot, and watch the pink edge of dawn creep over the hills. Then he'd step into the cold, leather coat snug over flannel, hat tilted low, boots heavy with frost. His only company was Toby, an old cattle dog whose bark was more grunt than growl these days. They kept to routine: fix fences, haul water, check traps along the river bend, feed the 2 horses he still kept in the barn. Though he hadn't ridden into town in weeks, the place was quiet, save for the sound of boots on dirt and wind through pine. Calder preferred it that way. People meant trouble, and he'd had enough of both. His isolation wasn't just geographical, it was emotional. He hadn't trusted anyone since the day his younger brother rode off with Calder's wife and half his savings. That betrayal shattered whatever fragile hope he had left. Calder didn't write letters, didn't read the ones that came. The world had moved on, and he'd chosen to stay behind, despite the distance from society. Calder wasn't careless. He kept his weapons oiled and his eyes sharp. Coyotes and mountain lions roamed nearby, sometimes worse. Travelers, drifters, even bounty hunters came this way on occasion. Calder made sure they kept going. His land wasn't marked on maps for a reason. One winter, a stranger had wandered too close. Calder warned him off with a rifle. Another time, a pair of thieves tried to break into the barn. They left limping, empty-handed. Word got out, don't bother the man in the valley. That suited Calder just fine. But deep down beneath the gruffness, beneath the silence, was a man still capable of feeling. He read books at night, mostly old Western novels and journals his father left behind. He talked to Toby like the dog understood. On rare days, he'd sit by the river, remembering a time when laughter lived here, when someone used to sing while cooking, when the bed didn't feel so big and cold. Yet Calder never let those memories linger too long. They hurt more than helped. The cabin itself was modest: wood stove, narrow bed, shelves lined with canned goods and bullets. A picture frame sat turned down on the mantel. He hadn't looked at it in years. The floors creaked. The roof leaked. In spring, but it was home. And more importantly, it was safe. Then came the storm. It started like any other, with distant thunder and sudden wind. Calder noticed the pressure drop, the way animals grew uneasy. Clouds gathered fast. By dusk, the sky was a violent gray, swirling with dust and grit. Toby barked, sensing something was wrong. Calder moved fast, tying down shutters, bolting the barn doors, checking the lantern fuel. He was used to surviving harsh conditions, but something about this storm felt different, the kind of difference that made the air feel heavy, like it was holding its breath. As night fell, the wind howled like wolves. The temperature dropped. Calder had just finished locking the storage shed when Toby stopped in his tracks and growled. The cowboy turned, squinting through the snow that had begun to fall sideways. Then he heard it, a knock. Slow, firm, not wind-blown debris or tree branches, but a human hand on wood. Calder froze. No one should have been out here, not during this weather, not this deep into the range. He gripped the handle of his rifle and stepped toward the door. Toby followed, tail stiff, hackles raised. Another knock, 3 times now. He opened the door. Just a crack. There, standing against the storm, were 5 young women, barely visible under cloaks and coats, faces pale, hair soaked, eyes wide. One of them, taller than the rest, spoke. "Sir, we're lost. Can we come in, just for tonight?" Calder didn't respond right away. His mind was already racing. Who were they? Why were they out here? Why 5 of them? Where were the horses? 1,000 questions and no time to ask. He stared at them. Their clothes weren't the type worn by ranch wives or homesteaders. They looked like performers, travelers out of place in every sense. One girl clutched a small satchel like her life depended on it. Another kept glancing over her shoulder, as if afraid someone had followed. Toby whined. Calder lowered the rifle but didn't step aside. "One night," he said gruffly. "That's all." The wind shrieked as he opened the door wider. The 5 women stepped into the warmth of the cabin, dripping snow and secrets all over the floor. And just like that, Calder Briggs's lonely world began to change. The cabin door slammed shut behind the 5 women as the storm howled outside, rattling the windows with furious gusts of snow-laced wind. Inside, the air shifted warmer than outside. Yes, but tense, uncertain, heavy with questions Calder wasn't yet ready to ask. The room fell into a strange silence, interrupted only by the low hiss of the fire and Toby's soft growl. As he watched the strangers with suspicion, Calder stood tall near the doorway, arms crossed, his eyes scanning each of the 5 women. They were soaked to the bone, shivering, their faces pale from cold and exhaustion. Despite their condition, something about them set off alarm bells in Calder's gut. They weren't ordinary travelers. The tall one with black curls and commanding eyes stepped forward. Her voice was polite but firm. "Thank you, sir. We didn't expect anyone to be out here." "No one is," Calder said flatly. "That's the point." She nodded, removing her wet gloves. "I'm Rosalind. These are Nora, Clara, Mabel, and June." The others murmured hellos, though not all met his eyes. Nora, the sharpest looking of the bunch, kept glancing around the cabin like she was casing it. Clara, the youngest, clung to a blanket she had wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes full of nervous energy. Mabel, stout and quiet, busied herself trying to wring water from her sleeves. June, pale, thin, with haunted eyes, stood still like she was frozen in place. "You lost?" Calder asked, already guessing the answer. Rosalind hesitated. "You could say that. We were traveling west when our wagon broke a wheel. The driver took off with the horses." "Left you to die in a storm?" he asked, voice skeptical. She nodded. "We had no choice but to walk. We saw smoke from your chimney." Calder's jaw tightened. "How far back was this?" "About 2 miles east of the pass," Nora answered quickly, stepping in. "That's cattle country. You sure you didn't see the ranch gate?" "No," Rosalind interrupted. "Just your smoke. We followed it. It was a clean story, but too clean." Calder had lived too long alone not to recognize when something was off. Their clothes didn't match the tale. Rosalind's boots were good leather, high quality. Mabel wore rings too many for a traveler, and June, she hadn't said a word. But Calder also knew better than to throw them back out in the storm. He moved toward the fireplace, stoking it with another log. "There's bread and coffee," he said gruffly, "but no dinner. You'll have to make do." "Anything warm is heaven right now," Clara murmured. Toby gave a short bark and limped toward his corner, but his eyes never left the guests. Rosalind took a seat by the fire, removing her coat and revealing a dark blue velvet dress beneath worn at the edges, but once beautiful. Clara helped June to a chair, her movements tender, protective. Calder noticed the way June winced as she sat. Injury, illness, he made a mental note. As the women thawed, the small cabin filled with the scent of smoke, wet wool, and something else. Secrets. Rosalind made idle conversation, asking about the land, how long Calder had lived here, what he did for work. He didn't offer much. Long enough. He answered to most questions. "Don't go to town often. Don't need much." "You live here alone?" Nora asked, her tone curious but edged with something sharper. "Just me and the dog." Nora gave a faint smile, but her eyes didn't. Calder poured coffee into tin cups, watching their hands as they took them. June's fingers trembled. Mabel's gripped hers too tightly. Rosalind's were calm, composed, seasoned hands, used to keeping control. "I'll need names again, in order," he said, not hiding his suspicion. Rosalind blinked. "We already told you. I like to remember faces." Rosalind hesitated just a second too long. Then, "Rosalind, Nora, Clara, Mabel, June." He nodded slowly. "You'll stay here tonight. Only tonight, of course," Rosalind said. "We don't want to be a burden." Calder set his cup down and stood. "Blankets are in the trunk by the bed. There's space in the loft if you don't mind hard floors." The women nodded, murmured thanks, and began gathering what they needed. Still, Calder could feel them watching him, measuring him, even as they tried to relax. Something tense lingered in the air like smoke. And then a moment, as Calder turned to check the fire again, he caught sight of something glinting from beneath June's coat, a flash of metal silver, or maybe gold. But when he looked again, it was gone, hidden. Later that night, he pretended to sleep in his chair by the fire while the women whispered softly in the loft. He couldn't hear words, but the tone was urgent. Rosalind's voice sharp, Clara's nervous, Mabel's short and clipped. "Someone said we can't tell him." Another voice hissed, "We're not safe yet." Safe from what? He didn't know. But the next morning, Calder Briggs would wake to a decision that would change the course of his life forever. Because these weren't just strangers seeking shelter, they were running from something, and something was coming for them. The wind battered the cabin walls like angry fists throughout the night. The storm had not eased, if anything. It had grown meaner, wilder. Snow piled against the windows, and the sound of branches snapping echoed like distant gunfire. Inside, the fire crackled low, casting flickering shadows across the log walls and over the faces of Calder and his unexpected guests. He hadn't gone to bed. Calder sat in his creaking wooden chair near the hearth, his rifle across his lap, not quite threatening, but not subtle either. He wasn't trying to scare them. He was sending a message. I don't know who you are, and I don't trust you. The 5 women had taken to the loft, bundled up in old quilts and spare blankets. He could hear them occasionally stirring, whispering in hushed voices just beyond his understanding. From time to time, one of them would descend the ladder to stoke the fire or use the wash basin. Every time they did, Calder watched. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. Something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the way they looked or how little they said, it was what they didn't say that gnawed at Calder's instincts. He'd lived too long in silence not to recognize lies disguised as small talked. Sometime after midnight, Calder rose from his chair and stepped outside, coat pulled tight and boots crunching on fresh snow. The storm was still in full rage, but he needed air, needed to think. He walked to the edge of the porch and looked out across the white landscape. The wind stung his face, and snowflakes clung to his beard. The horizon was completely obscured. No moon, no stars, just swirling darkness. Toby followed him, ears back, alert. Something's off, boy, Calder muttered. They're hiding something. Toby let out a soft whine, almost a confirmation. Calder's thoughts turned again to June, the pale, fragile one. He had seen the glint beneath her coat earlier. Jewelry, maybe, or a weapon. Rosalind had deflected questions with practiced ease. Nora had a watchful nature, like someone used to danger, and Clara, too young to lie so easily, but clearly coached. Mabel was quiet, but her eyes scanned everything: walls, windows, exits. He didn't know who they were, but he was starting to believe they weren't just unlucky travelers. Back inside, he tossed another log on the fire. Then he moved to the window and slowly peeled back the edge of the curtain. No lights outside, no movement, but that didn't mean they hadn't been followed. He returned to his chair, but this time, he didn't face the fire. He faced the ladder, to the loft. The morning came reluctantly, with gray light seeping through the frosted window panes. The storm hadn't stopped, but it had quieted enough for the howling wind to give way to muffled silence. One by one, the women descended from the loft. Rosalind came first, buttoned up and composed. She nodded toward Calder, who hadn't moved from his chair. Storm's easing, she said. Calder gave a grunt. Won't be over till tomorrow. You'll need to stay one more night. Rosalind didn't respond right away, but the faintest flicker crossed her face. Relief or calculation? Thank you, she said finally. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Calder made flapjacks and coffee, and the women cleaned up without being asked. They tried to act normal. Clara smiled too hard. Mabel hummed to him while scrubbing a pan, but Calder watched every move. At one point, Nora slipped outside to the outhouse. Toby followed. When she returned, Calder noticed the back of her coat had been dusted with something other than snow. Ash. He didn't say anything, but it confirmed a growing suspicion. They had burned something, a map, a letter, evidence. Later that afternoon, Calder stepped into the barn to check the horses. He found fresh hay scattered in the wrong stall, as though someone had rummaged through the feed sacks. He glanced at the loft space above the stable, empty for now. On his way back to the house, he stopped by a patch of snow that looked recently disturbed. Kneeling, he uncovered the charred remains of paper. The edges were too burned to read, but the seal looked official, maybe from a bank or government. His gut twisted. Back inside, Rosalind met his gaze. Her tone was smooth. Everything all right? No, Calder said, walking past her. Not even close. That night, Calder set rules. You don't leave the cabin, he told them. Not without telling me. I don't care what you're hiding, I just don't want trouble knocking down my door. We're not trouble, Rosalind said quickly. No, Calder eyed her. You're hiding something. All 5 of you. I've lived alone a long time, and I've met more liars than friends. Nora bristled, but Rosalind held up her hand, silencing her. We're not here to cause you harm, she said. We just needed a place to survive the night, that's all. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. One more night. Then you're gone by first light, understood? But even as he said it, Calder knew the storm outside wasn't the only thing brewing. There was danger following these women. He could feel it in his bones. Something was coming, and whether he liked it or not, Calder was now part of whatever game they were playing. As he sat by the fire that night, rifle beside him again, Toby curled up at his feet. The women were back in the loft, whispering in that same anxious tone. Just one more night, Calder reminded himself, but in his gut, he knew nothing about this would end that easily. The wind battered the cabin walls like angry fists throughout the night. The storm had not eased. If anything, it had grown meaner, wilder. Snow piled against the windows, and the sound of branches snapping echoed like distant gunfire. Inside, the fire crackled low, casting flickering shadows across the log walls and over the faces of Calder and his unexpected guests. He hadn't gone to bed. Calder sat in his creaking wooden chair near the hearth, his rifle across his lap, not quite threatening, but not subtle either. He wasn't trying to scare them. He was sending a message. I don't know who you are, and I don't trust you. The 5 women had taken to the loft, bundled up in old quilts and spare blankets. He could hear them occasionally stirring, whispering in hushed voices just beyond his understanding. From time to time, one of them would descend the ladder to stoke the fire or use the wash basin. Every time they did, Calder watched. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. Something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the way they looked or how little they said, it was what they didn't say that gnawed at Calder's instincts. He'd lived too long in silence not to recognize lies disguised as small talk. Sometime after midnight, Calder rose from his chair and stepped outside, coat pulled tight and boots crunching on fresh snow. The storm was still in full rage, but he needed air, needed to think. He walked to the edge of the porch and looked out across the white landscape. The wind stung his face, and snowflakes clung to his beard. The horizon was completely obscured. No moon, no stars, just swirling darkness. Toby followed him, ears back, alert. Something's off, boy, Calder muttered. They're hiding something. Toby let out a soft whine, almost a confirmation. Calder's thoughts turned again to June, the pale, fragile one. He had seen the glint beneath her coat earlier. Jewelry, maybe, or a weapon. Rosalind had deflected questions with practiced ease. Nora had a watchful nature, like someone used to danger, and Clara, too young to lie so easily, but clearly coached. Mabel was quiet, but her eyes scanned everything: walls, windows, exits. He didn't know who they were, but he was starting to believe they weren't just unlucky travelers. Back inside, he tossed another log on the fire. Then he moved to the window and slowly peeled back the edge of the curtain. No lights outside, no movement, but that didn't mean they hadn't been followed. He returned to his chair, but this time, he didn't face the fire. He faced the ladder, to the loft. The morning came reluctantly, with gray light seeping through the frosted window panes. The storm hadn't stopped, but it had quieted enough for the howling wind to give way to muffled silence. One by one, the women descended from the loft. Rosalind came first, buttoned up and composed. She nodded toward Calder, who hadn't moved from his chair. Storm's easing, she said. Calder gave a grunt. Won't be over till tomorrow. You'll need to stay one more night. Rosalind didn't respond right away, but the faintest flicker crossed her face. Relief or calculation? Thank you, she said finally. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Calder made flapjacks and coffee, and the women cleaned up without being asked. They tried to act normal. Clara smiled too hard. Mabel hummed a hymn while scrubbing a pan, but Calder watched every move. At one point, Nora slipped outside to the outhouse. Toby followed. When she returned, Calder noticed the back of her coat had been dusted with something other than snow. Ash. He didn't say anything, but it confirmed a growing suspicion. They had burned something, a map, a letter, evidence. Later that afternoon, Calder stepped into the barn to check the horses. He found fresh hay scattered in the wrong stall, as though someone had rummaged through the feed sacks. He glanced at the loft space above the stable, empty for now. On his way back to the house, he stopped by a patch of snow that looked recently disturbed. Kneeling, he uncovered the charred remains of paper. The edges were too burned to read, but the seal looked official, maybe from a bank or government. His gut twisted. Back inside, Rosalind met his gaze. Her tone was smooth. Everything all right? No, Calder said, walking past her. Not even close. That night, Calder set rules. You don't leave the cabin, he told them. Not without telling me. I don't care what you're hiding, I just don't want trouble knocking down my door. We're not trouble, Rosalind said quickly. No, Calder eyed her. You're hiding something. All 5 of you. I've lived alone a long time, and I've met more liars than friends, Nora bristled. But Rosalind held up her hand, silencing her. We're not here to cause you harm, she said. We just needed a place to survive the night, that's all. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. One more night. Then you're gone by first light, understood. But even as he said it, Calder knew the storm outside wasn't the only thing brewing. There was danger following these women. He could feel it in his bones. Something was coming, and whether he liked it or not, Calder was now part of whatever game they were playing. As he sat by the fire that night, rifle beside him again, Toby curled up at his feet. The women were back in the loft, whispering in that same anxious tone. Just one more night, Calder reminded himself, but in his gut, he knew nothing about this would end that easily. The storm gave way to a heavy calm. The sky turned pale with dawn, casting a cold, flat light across the snow-covered valley. Everything outside looked frozen in time, trees buried under white, fence posts barely poking through the drifts, and not a single track leading to or from the ranch. But inside the cabin, something had shifted. The 5 women had settled into a fragile routine. Rosalind took on the role of spokesperson. Clara, ever soft-spoken, often stayed near June, who still hadn't said much at all. Mabel worked with steady hands, quietly helpful, and Nora, well, Calder noticed she always seemed to know where his rifle was. Calder remained distant, not unkind, but cautious. He still didn't know who they were. He still didn't know what danger followed them. And now, with the worst of the snow past, the reality hit him hard. They were likely not going anywhere anytime soon. That morning, he stepped into the attic. It wasn't a place he visited often. He kept things up there: old tools, rusted lanterns, broken furniture, but most of all, memories. Dust floated in shafts of cold sunlight. Wooden floorboards creaked beneath his boots. A few boxes leaned in the corner, sealed but not forgotten. He was looking for a saddlebag he hadn't touched in years, something to patch up a worn strap on the horses. But what he found instead was a small wooden chest, locked but not secure. The case still hung on a rusty nail above it, where his late father used to keep it. Calder hesitated, then opened the chest. Inside, among old photographs and a Colt revolver, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a bundle of letters, faded parchment, edges curled, and tied with rough twine. He untied them slowly, fingers brushing over ink that had barely survived the years, and there, scrawled across the top envelope, was a name that stopped his breath. To Calder. In case I don't make it back. It was from Levi Briggs, his younger brother, the same brother who had betrayed him more than a decade ago. His hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, maybe not even your attention, but if you're reading this, it means something went wrong, and I need you to know the truth. The letter spoke of a scheme. Levi had been caught up in smuggling gold left behind during the Civil War. Confederate coins recirculated through corrupt sheriffs and outlaws with long memories. Levi had gotten involved by accident, he claimed, and once he tried to back out, the men in charge came after him. They'll use anyone to cover their trail, Calder, even women. They made them travel with us to hide the money, to mislead bounty men. I helped a few escape when I had the chance. If they ever come your way, help them. Calder read the letter 3 times. It couldn't be a coincidence. 5 women, appearing during a storm, hiding, on the run, and one of them June, carrying something he hadn't yet seen but had glimpsed under her coat. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it in his jacket. When he came back down the stairs, Rosalind was sitting at the table. She didn't flinch when she saw his expression, but she noticed it. Everything all right? She asked. No, Calder said. And I think it's time we stop pretending. He laid the letter down between them. She didn't touch it, just stared at the handwriting. I recognized that, she said softly. Levi, you knew him? Briefly, she said. He was the one who told us to find you, before he disappeared. Clara came down the stairs just then, froze in place at the sight of the letter, then looked at Rosalind. He told you about the cabin. Rosalind nodded. Calder narrowed his eyes. You didn't find this place by accident. Rosalind exhaled, finally dropping the mask. No, we came here because it was the only safe place left. She pushed up her sleeve and revealed a faded tattoo near her elbow, a brand, crudely inked. We were part of a network, not willingly. We helped move shipments, money, gold, anything the law couldn't see. Some of us were born into it, others were taken. Nora entered next, rifle in hand. Her face was unreadable. You told him? She asked Rosalind. It's time, Rosalind replied. Calder stepped back, still trying to process it. So what are you now? Thieves, witnesses, targets, Nora said. And if they find us here, you will be too. Who's they? Rosalind's voice dropped. A man named Sheriff Marin. He runs a ring out of Silver Bluff. Not the law, he owns the law. Levi double-crossed him. Tried to get us out. That was months ago. And now, they know we're missing, she said. And they'll come this way. They always do. Calder felt a strange heat rising in his chest, not just anger or confusion. Purpose, for the first time in years. He wasn't just surviving, he was standing in someone else's storm. A storm his brother had tried to outrun. A storm that had finally reached him. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked. Rosalind met his eyes. Because we didn't know if we could trust you. Calder looked around the room at June, who sat silently by the fire, her face pale but listening. At Clara, who clutched her hands tightly. At Nora and Mabel, tense but calm. I don't trust you, Calder said. Not yet. He pulled the letter from his coat and tapped it. But I trust him. And just like that, the line was drawn. The cabin was no longer just a refuge from snow, it was a last stand waiting to happen. Something dangerous was coming, and Calder Briggs, once a man who asked nothing of the world, was about to defend it with everything he had. The air had changed inside the cabin. Gone were the soft smiles and cautious glances. No more pretending, no more playing house in the storm. The women had dropped their masks. And Calder Briggs, who once swore he'd never get involved in anyone else's mess again, now found himself at the center of a danger that had been years in the making. They were no longer guests. They were fugitives, and Calder, whether he liked it or not, was now their only protection. Rosalind rolled the map open across the kitchen table. It was hand-drawn, stained in places with water and ash, and marked with faint trails, coordinates, and symbols. At the center, scrawled in Levi's handwriting, was a circle around an area near the Red Rock Ravine. This is what they're after, she said. The last stash Levi told us about. Confederate gold reclaimed, race melted, and hidden by Sheriff Marin and his men. Not just cash, evidence. Calder studied the map. Jaw tight. Why not destroy it? We tried, Nora said, arms crossed. That piece you found burned in the snow. That was the decoy. The real one was hidden with June. All eyes turned toward the quietest of the group. June sat at the edge of the room, her thin fingers wrapped tightly round a worn leather satchel. Without a word, she pulled it open and revealed what had been hidden inside. The second half of the map, finer, more detailed, coordinates, landmarks. A note in Levi's hand that read, "If you make it to him, he'll know what to do." Calder looked at the pieces, then at the women. He expected me to fight for this. Rosalind shook her head. He expected you to survive it. That afternoon, Calder led them to the barn. He handed out tools, hammers, nails, lengths of wire. Together, they began reinforcing the doors and sealing up weak points. The cabin wasn't a fortress, but it had strong bones. It would hold for a time. We don't know when they'll come, Calder said, but we'll assume they're already close. How many do you think? Mabel asked. Depends how desperate they are. Marin will want it quiet, fast, maybe for men, maybe 10. Clara, who had barely spoken all morning, looked up. We can't fight off 10 men. Calder met her gaze. Then we don't fight. Fair. They worked late into the night, setting traps in the snow near the tree line, digging shallow trenches that would collapse under horse weight, and rigging the barn loft with a rope snare that could drop a full beam. Nora handled the rifles. With practiced precision, Rosalind took charge of organizing escape routes. Even Clara, nervous as she was, proved nimble with a knife when it came to carving triggers for snares. It was Calder who taught them how to move like ghosts on their own land. Don't think like prey, he told them. Think like the coyote. Small, smart, ruthless when you need to be. Inside, the cabin turned from shelter to command post. Ammunition was counted and stacked, knives sharpened, food rationed. Even Toby, the old dog, seemed to catch the tension in the air. He paced more, barked less, eyes always fixed on the windows. That night, Rosalind found Calder outside by the edge of the pasture, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette and staring into the black beyond the hills. You've done a lot for us, she said. Calder didn't look at her. Not for you, for him. Still, thank you. He exhaled slowly. You ever think about what comes after? Rosalind shrugged. If there is an after, I'll figure it out when I get there. Fair enough. They stood in silence for a while. Then Calder asked what had been gnawing at him since the confession earlier. Did Levi make it out? Rosalind hesitated. He tried. The last I saw him, he stayed behind so we could get away. We didn't see what happened, But he gave us this. She nodded to the satchel and said to find you. Calder's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Grief wasn't something he wore on the outside anymore. It was stitched into him, invisible and permanent. The next morning, it came. A single shot cracked across the snow from the ridge. Calder dove from the barn roof, rifle in hand, landing beside Nora, who'd already taken cover behind a low stack of firewood. "They're here," she said. Rosalind rushed out from the cabin, shotgun drawn. Clara pulled June behind the chimney wall while Mabel loaded pistols from a crate of supplies. Through the spyglass, Calder spotted 4 riders just over the ridge, all dressed in long coats, rifles on their shoulders. One of them wore a deputy's badge, but the smug grin said he was no lawman. "Only 4? Clara whispered. "For now," Calder said grimly. One of the riders raised his voice, echoing across the frozen field. "Rosalind, you've had your fun. Time to come home." It was Sheriff Marin's Lieutenant Ixalos. He'd once been known for dragging fugitives behind his horse until they confessed or died. He wasn't the patient type. Rosalind stepped to the edge of the porch and shouted back, "We're not hiding anymore." Dick laughed. "That's cute. You think this cowboy's gonna save you?" Calder stepped beside her, rifle raised. "No," he said coldly, "but I can bury you." And with that, the real waiting began. The siege, the standoff, each side sizing the other up. But Calder knew something Marin and his men didn't. They weren't just defending gold. They were defending the last promise Levi Briggs ever made, and for that, Calder would fight until the snow turned red. The night fell heavy. Not in sound. There was no thunder, no wind, no storm left to howl. This night was heavy in silence, in waiting, in the weight of everything that could happen when dawn broke across the white Wyoming. Hilsey inside the cabin, Calder paced like a wolf in a cage. He checked the rifle, then the shells, then the windows again. He knew the men outside were watching. Sheriff Marin's crew wouldn't attack right away. They'd wait, let fear do the work, surround the ranch, cut off options, make everyone inside sweat. But Calder had lived through worse. He'd survived war, betrayal, and 12 years of silence. This was personal. The women were quiet too. Clara sat by the fire, wrapping June's arm in fresh cloth. The younger girl had a fever, mild but rising. Mabel crushed dried willow bark with the back of a spoon to ease her pain. They all worked with practiced hands, like they'd done this before, like they'd been in too many places where help never came. In the corner, Rosalind cleaned the barrel of a sawed-off shotgun. Her movements were slow, deliberate, not because she was unsure but because she was thinking, calculating. Calder watched her for a long while before speaking. "You were more than just cargo in that smuggling ring." She didn't look up. "What makes you say that? You give orders like someone used to being followed." Rosalind smiled faintly. "We all had our roles. Mine was keeping people alive." "You didn't answer." She finally met his gaze. "I wasn't just part of it, Calder. I helped build it." He blinked. "The smuggling, I grew up in it," she said. "Born in the back of a wagon headed west. My father was a Confederate officer turned outlaw. My mother a stage performer. I learned to fire a revolver before I learned to braid my hair." "You stayed in it that long?" "There wasn't a way out, not until Levi." That name again. Calder's jaw tightened. Rosalind set the gun aside and leaned forward. "Levi tried to burn it all down. He wanted to take Marin's power away, not for glory, for justice. For all the women like us who'd been used, bought, sold like grain in a sack. And now," Rosalind's voice softened, "now we're the last link in the chain, and Marin wants to rip it out of the ground." Calder nodded slowly. "You could still run, and go where?" Rosalind asked. "Start over in a town that's run by men like Marin. We've tried. We're tired of running." Calder turned away, chewing on the edge of the conversation. Like Gristle, he understood now. This wasn't just about gold. It wasn't just about Levi. It was about ending something that should have died a long time ago. Later that night, Calder took Nora outside to walk the perimeter. Snow crunched beneath their boots, the night air biting at exposed skin. The sky was clearer than it had been in days, stars scattered across black velvet. But out past the fences, the dark still held shadows they couldn't see. "You trust Rosalind?" Calder asked her. Nora took a moment before answering. "With my life, but not your secrets." Nora's eyes flicked sideways. "You're sharp, been burned too many times not to be." Nora stopped walking and looked out at the ridge. "I killed a man," she said quietly. "One of Marin's. He tried to drag June off during a drop. I didn't wait for orders. I just put a bullet in him." "Good," Calder said. She blinked, surprised. He continued, ain't justice if it only shows up late. Marin made you fight like wolves. That makes you survivors, not criminals. Nora nodded once, then exhaled slowly. I never thought we'd make it this far. We haven't yet. Back inside, Clara sat awake by June, holding her hand and whispering something soft, a lullaby, maybe, or a prayer. Calder watched for a moment, remembering what it was like to have someone he cared about that deeply. When he turned, Mabel was at the kitchen counter, cleaning out a wound on her arm, a fresh cut from earlier trap playing. You all right? He asked. She nodded, scratched, not bit. You're quiet, never needed many words. He gave a faint smile. Same. Then Mabel surprised him. You ever think this place would be your tomb? Calder didn't answer right away. I used to, before you came, as the fire burned low. Rosalind brought out something none of them expected, a bottle of whiskey, nearly full, sealed with wax. Levi's bottle. He said to save it for the night before, she said. Calder looked at the label. It was dated 5 years earlier, a distillery from Tennessee. The seal cracked with a soft snap as Rosalind opened it. She poured 5 small cups, then poured one more, and set it at the edge of the table. For Levi, she said. Each of them raised a glass, to the one who gave us a second chance. Calder raised his too, and to tomorrow not promised, but still worth fighting for. They drank. The burn in his throat reminded him he was still alive. Hours later, the cabin went still. The fire was reduced to embers. June slept at last. Clara curled beside her. Nora took first watch. Mabel snored lightly in the corner, wrapped in a thick quilt. Rosalind sat alone on the porch, shotgun across her knees, eyes on the dark hills. Calder joined her. She didn't speak, neither did he. They just sat, listening to the stillness, watching the line between shadow and snow. Tomorrow would bring fire and blood, but tonight was theirs. The first shot came just before sunrise. It split the silence like a whip crack, sharp, sudden, and deadly close. Calder was already awake. He'd slept in a chair by the fire, boots on, rifle ready across his lap. The second he heard the gunfire, he bolted upright and was at the window in 2 strides. Smoke. Movement. 2 shadows running across the tree line toward the barn. He didn't wait. They're here. The cabin erupted into motion. Rosalind was already sliding into her coat. Shotgun in hand, Nora grabbed the repeater from its peg on the wall and dove for the door. Mabel threw the kitchen table onto its side to use as a barricade. Clara rushed to June's side, pulling her behind the hearth. Calder threw open the front door and ducked as a second shot hit the top beam. Come on, he barked to Nora. She was right behind him. Together, they sprinted across the porch and dove behind a frozen water trough. From there, Calder got his first real look. 6 men, at least, some on foot, some on horseback, creeping through the trees and using the storm's aftermath for cover. They moved like trained dogs, spread out, efficient, but hungry. Marin's wolves. They're flanking the west. Nora shouted. Calder turned. Get to the barn. Cut through the rear stall. Hit M from the side. Nora nodded and peeled off. Another shot rang out, this one from the cabin. Rosalind's shotgun barked once, and one of Marin's men dropped. Behind a stump, screaming and clutching his leg, Calder fired next, a clean shot. The rider nearest the gate tumbled from his horse in a bloom of red snow. He ducked as bullets whistled back toward him. One hit the trough, water gushed out. No time to waste. He rolled, sprinted, and vaulted over the side fence toward the shed. From behind the wheelbarrow, he reloaded. Inside, Mabel returned fire from the window. She was steady, sharp. Every round she fired was measured, purposeful, not wild panic. Experience. Clara crouched by the fire, keeping June low. The sick girl was breathing fast now, but her eyes were focused. She knew exactly what this was. Not their first ambush, not their last if they lived through it. Clara pulled a pistol from her boot and whispered, "Don't worry, I got you, Nora." Reached the barn. 2 of Marin's men were circling the back. She waited in silence, crouched just behind the gate. One of them walked past, tall, bearded, cocky. She slipped out behind him and drove the butt of her rifle into the back of his neck. The other turned to late. He raised his revolver. Nora shot him point blank. She ran along the edge of the pasture, circling back toward the tree line. The barn had drawn attention. Time to make it count. Calder moved fast. He ducked behind the wagon, took aim, and clipped another man in the shoulder. A scream, a curse, another dropped rifle. He didn't wait to celebrate. He ran again toward the cabin this time. The porch was riddled with holes. The railing splintered. He burst through the door. "Everyone all right? Clara and June are in cover." Rosalind answered. Mabel's holding the window. What about the west line? They're falling back, Mabel grunted. Nora's driving them hard. A second later, a body slammed against the wall outside. Nora kicked the door open, panting, blood on her coat. Not hers, that's 3 down, she said. 3. More, maybe 4. Rosalind tossed her a new clip outside. The shouts began. The scattered rhythm of chaos began to shift into something darker. Retreat. Pull back. They're dug. Another shot rang out. One of the wounded tried to crawl away. Calder fired once more, ending it. The forest fell quiet. No more shouting. No more boots crunching in snow. Just silence. Calder stepped out cautiously, rifle raised. Rosalind followed. Smoke drifted up from the trees. 3 bodies were still visible. One horse was limping off into the woods. A blood trail followed. He turned to Nora. You think Marin was here? She shook her head. Too smart for that. This was a test, a warning, Rosalind said bitterly. Calder nodded. He knows now. We won't go easy. Back inside the cabin, Clara was wrapping June in a fresh blanket. Her fever had broken. She was pale but alert. You did good, Calder said softly. Clara looked up at him. Is it over? No, Rosalind said. This was just the opening act. We lost nothing, Calder said. They lost 4. Rosalind gave him a look. That won't stop Marin. He'll come himself next time. Calder glanced at the shattered porch, the bullet holes in the walls, the blood-stained snow beyond the windows. Let him come. That night, they burned the bodies. It was dangerous, risky to put out smoke that could be seen for miles, but necessary. A message. We aren't prey. Rosalind placed Levi's letter in the flames, letting it go. Nora stood watch, rifle in hand. Clara sang quietly beside June. Calder didn't speak. He just stood in the firelight, watching the flames reach high into the night, thinking not of revenge, but of what must come next. The smoke from the burned bodies still lingered in the air the next morning. It curled low and heavy through the trees, a grim marker of what had happened. But Calder knew it did more than send a message. It summoned something. And sure enough, by mid-morning, the dogs began to bark. Toby stood rigid at the edge of the porch, ears up, teeth bared, eyes fixed on the ridge. Calder stepped outside slowly, rifle across his back, revolver at his hip. The others joined behind him. Rosalind, Nora, Mabel, Clara kept June safe inside. Then they saw it. 5 riders slowly making their way through the snow-covered brush. These weren't scouts. These weren't hired thugs. At the front of the line rode a man in a long black duster with a blood-red scarf and a star pinned crookedly to his chest. Sheriff Marin. He didn't look like law. Not anymore. His face was pale from the cold, but his eyes burned with heat. A man who had lost control and meant to take it back. With fire and bullets, Calder stepped down from the porch. Stopping just short of the gate, Marin pulled up his horse. You Briggs? I am. The sheriff looked him over, amused. He didn't lie. You do look like him. Calder said nothing. I see you've made yourself a little army, Marin went on, looking past him at the women by the cabin. Should have known Rosalind would crawl back out of some hole. You came for gold, Calder said evenly. It ain't here. No, Marin said. I came for my message, for of my men dead, shot, burned. One hung in a tree like a warning. They weren't your men, Calder replied. They were your hounds, and we put them down. Marin's grin vanished. I give you one chance, the sheriff growled. Hand them over, Rosalind. Nora, that girl with the map. I'll let the rest of you walk. Too late for deals, Calder said. You think I won't burn this whole place to the ground? Calder stepped forward. Just once. You try, and you'll be buried with it. Marin didn't attack, not yet. He turned his horse and rode off without another word, disappearing into the trees with his remaining men. But Calder knew what that meant. He'd be back, with fire. The rest of that day was a blur of preparation. Calder knew Marin wouldn't wait long. He had pride to restore and blood to repay. Nora checked the traps. Mabel sharpened every blade they had. Clara refilled every water jug and stacked dry wood. Rosalind and Calder built an oil line out to the far edge of the yard, a perimeter defense. Using the last of the lantern fuel, when lit, it would create a wall of fire between the cabin and the trees. Smart, Rosalind said. Only works once, Calder replied. We have to make it count. As dusk fell, he went into the barn, alone. He needed to face what came next with a clear head. And there, in the corner behind the hayloft, was something he hadn't touched in 12 years. Levi's old saddlebag. He opened it. Inside was a second revolver, still clean, a pocket watch, and a folded photo. 2 young men on horseback, smiling in the sun. Calder and Levi, before the lies, before the gold, before the fire that split their lives in two. He sat in the silence for a long time. Then he heard the footsteps. Rosalind stood in the doorway, arms folded. "You never stopped loving him," she said. "He was my brother." "He changed," she said quietly. "At the end, he tried to make it right." Calder nodded. "I just wish he'd told me the truth." "He wanted to," she said, "but he didn't want to pull you down with him." That night, the air felt electric. No snow, no wind, just that stillness that comes right before thunder. The women were quiet round the fire. Clara sang softly to June. Nora loaded the last bullets. Mabel tied her hair back and stood near the door. Ready. Calder looked out the window one last time and saw it. Fire. Torchlight moving through the woods, slow and steady. He counted at least 10 figures. Marin wasn't sending scouts now. He was sending killers. Calder turned to the others. "This is it." Rosalind nodded. "Then we make it count." As the firelight crept closer, Calder stepped out onto the porch. He raised Levi's revolver high and fired once into the sky, a signal. Then he shouted into the night, "Come and take them." And from the darkness, Sheriff Marin replied, "Gladly." The fire came fast. Torchlight streaked across the white field as Marin's men charged from the tree line, shouting, hooting, rifles raised. Their boots crunched over frozen ground, their shadows dancing like devils across the snow. From the porch, Calder stood tall, rifle in one hand, Levi's revolver holstered at his hip. "Now," he barked. Rosalind struck the match with a hiss. The oil line burst into flame, a curved wall of fire erupting between the cabin and the advancing riders. Horses reared and panicked. 2 men tumbled into the snow, caught by the heat. One screamed and flailed, his coat catching. "Hold the line," Marin bellowed from the back. "It's a trick. Go round." But Calder was already moving. He fired from the porch, one clean shot, and a man fell near the fence. Nora dropped another from the barn roof. Mabel, crouched at the window, opened fire with perfect calm. Clara threw open the side door and rolled a lantern into the tree's boom. A spray of fire lit the flank. The women were no longer running. They were fighting for their right to live. Marin kicked his horse and charged through the smoke. He didn't care about tactics anymore. He wanted revenge, vengeance, control. He pushed through the fire break, galloping toward the cabin with murder in his eyes. Calder saw him coming and stepped forward. "Stay back," Rosalind shouted from behind him. But Calder didn't flinch. He pulled Levi's revolver and leveled it, staring straight into Marin's path. Bang. The first shot hit the horse's shoulder. The second missed. The third dead center. Marin flew from the saddle and landed in the snow with a sickening crunch. The field quieted. The fire still burned, but the air was still. Marin's men, those who survived, ran. They didn't look back. Nora sprinted across the field, rifle raised, making sure no one remained. Mabel joined her. Clara stood protectively over June, both trembling and tearful but alive. Rosalind walked slowly toward the body in the snow. Calder followed. Marin was alive barely. Blood soaked his coat. His badge had snapped from the impact, lying crooked beside him. "You think this changes anything?" he croaked. Calder looked down at him, jaw clenched. "I know it does." Marin spat blood. "You're just like your brother. Thought you could change the world. Thought one man could burn it all down." Calder knelt beside him. "Not one man," he said. 5 women, and a promise." He raised Levi's gun one last time, but Rosalind stopped him. "No," she said softly. "Let him rot. Let them all see what he became." Calder stared at her, the fire reflecting in his eyes. Then he lowered the gun. Marin passed out seconds later. He wouldn't wake up again. The cabin was quiet that night. The women moved like shadows, cleaning wounds, stitching gashes, wrapping bruises. June was weak but recovering. Clara sat beside her, humming an old church psalm. Nora stood outside, in the cold, watching the woods, rifle still in hand. Mabel cooked what little food they had left, rabbit stew and hard bread. Calder sat by the fire, Levi's revolver on the table beside him. Rosalind joined him. "It's over," she said. Calder nodded slowly. "For now." She looked at him. "You don't have to stay here." He didn't answer for a while. "I left this world for a reason," he said finally. "Turned my back on people, law, family, and somehow it all came back anyway. You think that's fate?" "I think it's unfinished business." Rosalind smiled faintly. "Well, it's finished now." 2 weeks later, the snow had melted in patches. Smoke no longer rose from the ridge. Marin's body had been buried beside the creek, unmarked. The women prepared to move on free now, for the first time. But not aimless. With the map recovered. They had everything they needed to expose the entire ring, every stash, every hideout, every name involved. The gold wasn't just wealth anymore. It was proof. Clara and Mabel were heading east. Nora and Rosalind planned to deliver the evidence to a contact in Denver. June would stay with them until she was strong enough to choose her own road. Calder stood by the barn, saddling a fresh horse. Rosalind walked over, coat flapping in the wind. "You sure you don't want to come with us?" she asked. He looked at her, this fierce, brave, mysterious woman who had changed everything. "I've got work to do here," he said. "But I'll ride out someday, see what comes after." Rosalind stepped closer, eyes locked on his. "Then I'll save you a seat by the fire." She leaned in. Their lips met, soft, warm, quiet. Then she was gone. That night, Calder stood at the edge of the field. The snow had melted, the trees silent again. He took the revolver from his belt. Levi's aunt set it on the fence post. "I kept your promise, brother," he said quietly. "They're safe now." The wind carried no reply, but he imagined one anyway. A nod, a smile. Then Calder turned and walked back to the cabin. The sun was setting behind him, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone.